They told me to sit down before I even opened my mouth. Not politely, not quietly, just a sharp voice cutting through the room saying, "This isn't your turn, please don't waste our time." And yeah, everyone heard it. I remember standing there, hands, cold heart pounding so loud I was sure the microphone was picking it up, wondering how I'd gone from being invited to speak to being treated like I'd snuck in through the back door. All I could think was, wow, so this is how it starts. This is how they decide who belongs. Let me rewind a little. My name doesn't matter much because this story isn't really about names. It's about how fast people make up their minds when they think they know your place. I grew up in a neighborhood people like to describe with words like rough or under-resourced, the kind of place where success stories are treated like accidents. My school didn't have fancy programs or glossy brochures. We had old textbooks, flickering lights, and teachers who worked miracles with almost nothing. But I had this thing, a problem, a question that wouldn't leave me alone. I didn't even know it was supposed to be hard. I just knew nobody had an answer yet, and that somehow made it feel personal, like the problem was daring me to try. So I worked. Late nights, early mornings, scraps of paper stuffed into my backpack, diagrams drawn over and over until my fingers cramped. Not because anyone told me to, because I couldn't not do it. You know what I mean? When something grabs you and doesn't let go. Eventually, someone told me about this academic conference. Big deal. Big names, big egos. They had a student section, and on paper, I qualified. I submitted my work half expecting it to disappear into some digital void. Instead, I got an email back saying I'd been accepted. I read it 3 times to make sure it was real. Walking into that building the first day felt like stepping into another universe. Glass walls, polished floors. People speaking confidently about things I'd only read about online. Everyone looked like they belonged. Everyone except me. I could feel it in the way security eyed my badge and the way conversations stopped when I passed in the way someone laughed and whispered, "Who's that?" And then came my session. The moderator glanced at my name, frowned slightly, and before I could even start explaining what I was there to present, that voice came out. The one that told me to sit down. The one that said this wasn't the place for me. People chuckled, not loudly. Just enough. I felt that old familiar heat in my chest. That mix of shame and anger that says maybe they're right. Or maybe this is the moment you decide they're wrong. I took a breath and said calmly, I was scheduled to present. I'm just here to share my findings. That's when my opponent really stepped in. The respected figure. The gatekeeper. The kind of person whose approval opens doors and whose disapproval slams them shut. He smiled like I'd told a joke and said, "You're working on that problem. The one experts have been stuck on for decades." His tone said everything. This isn't serious. You aren't serious. I didn't argue. I didn't posture. I just said I found a different way to look at it. That's when the room changed. Not in my favor. Not yet. But the air shifted. Curiosity mixed with disbelief. He decided to test me. Not my work, me. He threw out a basic question, the kind designed to establish hierarchy. Everyone knew the answer. I gave it. Then I added something small, a correction, a detail he'd overlooked in his setup. The silence after that was heavy. He recovered quickly, laughed it off, and told me to move on. "You have a few minutes," he said like he was doing me a favor. So I did. I talked about patterns. About how everyone else had been staring straight at the problem, forcing it to fit a familiar frame, while I'd stepped back and asked a different question. What if the issue wasn't unsolvable, just poorly defined? What if adding one constraint changed everything? Some people leaned forward, others crossed their arms. My opponent watched closely now, not smiling anymore. He interrupted with a counterexample, drawing it out confidently, explaining why my approach couldn't work. Heads nodded. It looked bad. I felt that tightness in my throat again. Then I noticed it. A tiny mistake. 2 elements treated as separate that weren't. A violation of the very rule he was using to dismiss me. I hesitated. Every instinct said, don't do this. This is the moment where people like you get labeled disrespectful. But the math didn't care about that. The truth didn't care. So I said it. "Can we look at that part again?" He frowned, zoomed in. and there it was, clear as day. The room erupted not loudly but in movement. People whispering, phones coming out, someone in the back laughing in disbelief. My opponent's face went pale, then stiff. He brushed it off as a drafting error, but the damage was done. They took my work for review. Waiting outside that room was torture. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering if I'd pushed too hard, spoken out of turn, proved their worst assumptions about me. After what felt like forever, they called me back in. The verdict wasn't final, they said, but it was promising. Promising enough that they wanted me to present again the next day in front of everyone. That night I barely slept. I studied until my eyes burned. People reached out, some supportive, some clearly hoping I'd fail. One message stuck with me. "Be careful," it said. "They don't like being wrong." The next morning the room was packed. Media, academics, people who'd already decided what this story was going to be. Underdog miracle or cautionary tale. My opponent cornered me beforehand and spoke softly, almost kindly. Told me this was bigger than me now, that I'd be embarrassed if I went through with it, that sometimes walking away is the smart choice. I almost believed him. Almost. When I stepped on stage, the lights were brighter, hotter. My hands shook, but my voice held. I walked them through everything. The history, the assumptions, the shift in perspective. Halfway through, he interrupted again, this time with a technical objection pulled from an outside reviewer. For a moment, my mind went blank. Then I realized the objection was based on a misreading. The condition was already defined earlier. The logic held. I explained it slowly, carefully. No attitude, no ego. That's when he crossed the line. He questioned whether the work was really mine. You could feel the accusation land. Heavy, ugly. I answered honestly, yes, I did it myself. Over months, in pieces, with a lot of doubt and a lot of erasing. He challenged me on the spot with another problem trying to expose me. I asked clarifying questions, showed why his setup was ambiguous and solved it anyway. And then I broke. Not dramatically. Just tears I couldn't stop anymore. I told them I hadn't come there to fight. I just wanted to show my work. Something shifted then, not just in the room, but in me. When they let me finish, I didn't rush. I taught. I explained. I showed why the solution worked step by step until there was nowhere left to hide. They stood up one by one. The solution held. The applause was overwhelming, but what mattered most came after. I turned to my opponent and asked him the question that had been sitting in my chest since day one. If the work is what matters, I said, why did you decide who I was before you looked at it? He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, he admitted I was right. Admitted he'd been wrong. Out loud, in front of everyone. I thanked him anyway. Later, I found out he'd known my work was solid from the start. Fear made him cruel. Ego made him small. I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because I didn't want to carry that weight forward. Here's the part people argue about. Some say the system worked. That talent rose to the top. Others say it only worked because I refused to back down because I survived something that breaks a lot of people. So I'll ask you this. How many voices never get heard because they're told to sit down before they speak? How many answers are we missing because we decide who belongs before they prove it? Was this justice or luck? Tell me what you think in the comments. I want to hear your side.